In this week's the news, the ferry finance fiasco continues. Minister claims the tobacco lobby influence rankings are a total smoke show. Is a 40-minute long call to independent media really a hot mic moment? And the thing that should not be, a city out of room for visitors. All that and more on this week's the news. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's the news. I'm Paul, and I'm not going to confirm or deny if I'm also secretly Banksy, no matter how much you pay me. Just 2 days after voting for it, Winston Peters, seen here watching as the Ark of the Covenant is opened, has vowed to repeal the controversial Regulatory Standards Bill if re-elected. Peters claimed that they were opposed to it from the start, but were tied to a coalition agreement stating, "We did our best to neutralise its adverse effects and we will campaign at the next election to repeal it. We only have so many cards we can play, and clearly we had to hold on to those to harm targeted minority communities like the trans community, as you can see by how we broke the news of puberty blocker bans first and used all the rage-bait dog whistle terms we could to make the announcement." Rail Minister Winston Peters, seen here knowing that he can say or do anything and the rest of the coalition will just have to accept his flip-flops, has announced the estimated final costings of the replacement, smaller, not rail-enabled ferries and infrastructure this week, while also ignoring the extra $671 million spent on cancelling and restarting the process, and the estimated $180 million in ongoing extended maintenance of the current fleet of one old ship, and using hypothetical numbers to claim massive cost savings. When the IREX project was cancelled by text message, Finance Minister Nicola Willis claimed that the project cost had risen to almost $3 billion, coincidentally the same amount of money that they gave as tax breaks to landlords, while the Treasury report had said costs would possibly reach $4 billion. The minister's announcement on Wednesday confirmed the smaller, less capable ferries were costing us $45 million more than the previous ones, and claimed the project would be under $2 billion in total, not including the sunk costs with the project that have already paid. Said Peters, "In fact, we've saved the taxpayer $2.3 billion, only most of which were hypothetical numbers we made up to scare people into accepting that we had to cancel the project. And if you ignore the $851 million that we've added to the project through cancellation and ongoing maintenance of that aging asset systems, that would make them practically the same price. So don't do that." Associate Health Minister Casey Costello, seen here being more honest with Australian media than ours on who she really represents, has labelled Aotearoa New Zealand's recent plunge in the rankings of a global index on independence of policy from tobacco lobbyists from 2nd to 53rd as ridiculous and ludicrous. The Dirty Ashtray Award was given to the country earlier this week for major changes the coalition instigated in Smokefree policy, which included duty tax changes, tax kickbacks for tobacco companies, and removing plans to outlaw tobacco sales to people born after a specific date. Said Costello of the award, "It was absolute nonsense. They were comparing us to countries that have 3 times the smoking rate of us, and yet said that we had greater influence from the tobacco industry, and yet our smoking rates were one of the lowest listed because that's what the ranking was for. Smoking rates, and totally not the influence of tobacco companies on our policy like the award says on the tin. Policies which they wrote, which somehow ended up on my desk that I claim not to have known about. That was backed up by a hastily written ChatGPT argument for our decisions. So yeah, totally ludicrous decision." The families of Pike River disaster victims this week, on the 15th anniversary of the disaster, met with Workplace Relations Minister Brooke Van Velden, seen here saying the country put too high a value on human life during the height of the COVID pandemic, to discuss concerns that changes to workplace safety rules could lead to more tragic incidents, and left feeling they'd only been paid lip service. Van Velden, however, rejected concerns of the family, saying, "There are accidents that will happen. What I'm wanting to focus on is how do I improve the overall economy." Senior Minister Chris Bishop, seen here telling his PR team that he really has to drop a Metallica reference into an interview because it's mandated by law in the hut since they're in the country, has been receiving criticism this week after it was revealed that he'd signed off on a plan to shift funding from a Kaingara-Ora-related housing infrastructure project to a foot and cycle bridge his own party cancelled when cutting funding to alternative transport infrastructure. The Cabinet Manual states ministers should exercise careful judgment about possible conflicts between their constituency roles and any ministerial portfolios they hold. When asked if he saw it as a conflict, Bishop said it was a pretty straightforward deal. The council asked for it, we agreed, and since it's not a council run by Wahine Māori Green supporters and it's something that I campaigned for before we cancelled it, Nicola Willis and I signed off on it. Calls for the government to rethink its announcement to remove te tiriti obligations from schools are increasing this week after a grassroots movement started by lawyer Tanya Waikato has gained steam, with almost 1,000 schools now signing on to urge the Education Minister to rethink her position. In reaction to the surging support, Associate Education Minister David Seymour, seen here with a convicted child sex offender and his former party president, said, "What do they know about what's important in education? It's not like they're setting up private charter schools to teach about Western civilization morals or trying a hostile takeover of a public school like real educators that I deal with." Wellington City Councillor Ray Chung, seen here putting the independent into independent together, has come under fire for leaving a phone line open to controversial Wellington social media figure Graham Bloxham, which Bloxham then used to reveal details of the private council training session, which was, ironically, on how to handle media. However, it seems after an apology, Chung will avoid censure for what is being described as a hot mic moment. Chung, who was recently given the committee chair role that reviews CCO performances, made headlines during the recent local election campaign for a sexualised email regarding former Mayor Tory Whānau, described as vile by the Prime Minister. Said Wellington Mayor Andrew Little, seen here demonstrating how to blow on a pie, "When you have influential, mysterious millionaire backers, the only appropriate response is clearly to let them fail up and not be so worried about the message that sends to people." New Zealand First this week trumped the Minister of Health's announcement that they don't care about the health needs of trans people, revealing a cabinet decision early that the government intends to stop the new use of puberty blockers for healthcare needs for trans people. The announcement has drawn widespread condemnation from those working in trans health spaces, citing the importance of individualised healthcare needs, industry best practice, and research into the challenges already faced by the trans community. Said Associate Minister for Smoking, Casey Costello, seen here staring directly into the sun, "Today, Sanity won another battle in the war on woke after years of dangerous ideological experimentation pushed by radical activists." She then went on to say, "Now, as long as New Zealand First voters don't realise New Zealand First is also the result of years of dangerous ideological experimentation pushed by radical activists that could be banned from Parliament, like the time that Winston was trespassed for taking part in the illegal Wellington occupation, then we won't need to worry about the election either, unless enough people realise that they could vote for other parties in 2026 and kick us out." Auckland Pride has announced it's taking the government to court, filing a judicial review in the High Court over Sport Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here playing pull my finger in Parliament, in his decision to scrap transgender inclusive sports guidelines. The organisation says the document released under OIA shows that he did not consider the Bill of Rights, the Human Rights Act, or Sports NZ's legal obligations when making this decision, and this was especially concerning when the government had also stated that the Human Rights Act and Bill of Rights Act are applied to transgender people. While he wouldn't comment on the specific court case, in August Mitchell did say, "I just don't think the government should be meddling and getting into areas that the sports themselves are best placed to know on how to run their code." So clearly a voluntary guide that codes could choose to adopt or use as a guide specific to their own sport had to be scrapped to keep our coalition partners, the ones with the weird obsession against trans people, happy as agreed in our coalition agreement. And finally, the largest economy in the country this week was dealing with a unique issue, the ecstasy of gold, as there's no room for more visitors. Auckland played host this week to both the World Indigenous Peoples Conference in Education and a sold-out one-off Metallica concert, bringing in more than 60,000 people to the city between the two events. The economic benefit of Whipkey was estimated to be close to $9 million, while some estimates put the economic impact of Metallica to between $10 and $15 million. Said one attendee of both events, "This is the perfect combo. On one hand, we're here celebrating Indigenous learning in the face of a government working to wipe that out. And on the other, we get to hear music that sounds like it's written about the coalition. Master of Puppets, The Unforgiven, Seek and Destroy, Am I Evil, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and of course, Nothing Else Matters." And that's it for this week's news. Hey, I want to thank everyone for the support, especially those that voted in this year's Listener's Choice category for the New Zealand Podcast Awards. I was truly humbled to place third in the category with your support. It came as a complete shock out of the blue, so thank you all so much for that. Look, until next time, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and we'll catch you all later. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. While you're here, why not hit that like button or share the video or even subscribe to the channel. You could even become a paid YouTube member so you can see things released in advance, you get access to some exclusive content, and like all these awesome people, you get to have your name at the end of the credits as well.